I'll put the presentation up. I haven't been training for 40 years. I've been training more like 30 years since, I don't know, 1990 or something. And the functional thing is not mine. It comes from Reich, Wilhelm Reich, who I hope most of you know who Reich is. I don't want to spend the time talking about him, but he is the major influence on me, plus my trainer, Kelly, my teacher, Kelly. But mostly what I'm talking about is based on Reich and Reich's understanding of the relationship of body and mind. I know that the last thing in the world we need is another school of body psychotherapy or of psychotherapy. But I started playing with some of Reich's ideas and developing them, and things were happening in a way that shouldn't happen. I learned Carl Rogers' work first, and then encounter work. I trained with 3 different Gestalt therapists. I learned radix. I went to a lot of other workshops. And the things that were happening, I had no way to understand them in any of the trainings that I received. So I wound up, at first I thought the points and positions technique, the in-stroke thing, which I'll explain later, could simply be incorporated into existing body psychotherapy schools and techniques. But the whole model changed radically. And so what I want to do is I want to run through what is, I think, special or unique, or what functional analysis is offering. And these things include the understanding of functioning is one of the main themes. It's Reich's model of pulsation. We are a little different. We emphasized the self-to-self relationship rather than the self-to-other relationship in the therapy and as a functional model. There was also the concept of the endo-self, which we will explain. There is the idea of the in-stroke. There is the points and positions touch technique, which we developed, which is very different than most body psychotherapy physical approaches, because it's very gentle, it's very quiet, and in a lot of ways in the sessions, nothing happens, but things change. And also I think that this work, hopefully there's time, this work is very useful for early disturbance, what I consider generally schizoid, but not exclusively. There's other themes like neglect. It's good for borderline people. And we have a model for how to work with, we call it working with trauma without the drama. Because too often I think there's a risk in bringing trauma back up again. We have a way to work with and explain how you can work not only below defenses, psychic and physical, but also work below the trauma itself. And again, if there's time, I have some examples from working with patients. So I'd like to put up this presentation and we start going through that. Share. Is it up?
It's up, and just so if anybody's got it covering, their screen is covering, you've got these options at the top right-hand side that you can either take away the people, just have Will, or just have everything on the side. So just work it out for yourself, so that in case it's not covering the screen.
Okay. And one thing I forgot to mention that's critical in our work is the work with the connective tissue, and some very, very interesting, even exciting research about connective tissue in relation to neurology, neurological research. So this will be coming up soon, hopefully. Okay, the basic idea from Reich is that psychic and somatic defenses are the same in the mind and the body. This is the main thing to take from Reich right now if you're not familiar with him. They have what he calls functional identity. The psyche and the soma, they are both separate And you can see my arrow move, right? Yes? Okay. So what we have in different forms of psychotherapy, we have a psychosomatic approach, we have a body-mind approach, and we have the functional approach, the functional level. This is really what Reich offered to psychotherapy, but my opinion, it's not as well understood or appreciated. And in the trainings, this is the level, this is the thing. It's easy to learn the technique, the verbal style, the eye exercises. It's easy to understand the theory, but to really work on a functional level, this takes some years to get the feel for and the understanding of. On the psychosomatic level, what you have is the psyche and the soma are influencing each other. So we have psychosomatic disorders, Crohn's disease, irritable bowel syndrome, things like this. And they understand that there is a relationship between psyche and soma. In body-mind, which I think is most of body-oriented psychotherapy, again, there is a relationship between the two. One affects the other in a direct way. But what Reich was offering was something much different. Here, if you to use Reich's model, this is a diagram, adaptation from Reich. This represents Reich's orgone energy concept. This is the source of everything. This represents functioning. And the result is the creation of psyche and soma. Now you can work on this level where they influence each other. You can work on this level here where they are in a direct relationship. But the unique thing Reich was offering is that on the deeper level, down here somewhere, psyche and soma, and I would add emotions, are three forms of exactly the same thing. And the best way I can explain that is if we think of ice, steam, and water. We know that they are all the same thing. They are simply different energetic states of H2O. And if we think of the psyche, we can think of the steam part of water. It's elusive, it's there, but we can't really get a hold of it, but it has a great presence to it. If we think of the water state, we can think in terms of emotions. You can get a hold of them a little more, you can cup them in your hands, but they have a tendency to slip away. The more you try and grasp them, the more they slip away. And then you have the ice, solid form of water, which we could say is the body. This you can touch, this seems more real, more absolute, more present. But the important thing is they are only different forms of the same phenomena. In this case, we talk about psyche and soma and emotions as three different representations of something much deeper. And on this deeper level, they are all the same. If you go psyche, soma, and let's say we put emotions in here, these all look very different. They have different behaviors, they have different structure, but on the deepest level, they work in the same way. So the idea from Reich is, can we work on this level? Not necessarily here. Don't work with the tight muscle. Don't work with the problem, with the transferential problem in the therapy because of the father. The tight muscle, the therapy problem, they meet here, and then they can even go deeper. And this is what we try and do. So when we work with patients, instead of sitting opposite in a way, this is a visual representation, two psyches, two somas meeting. And if the therapist is over here, they try and meet and help the patient to go deeper in this way. Okay, this certainly works. We know psychotherapy, this model is effective. And there's no reason in a way why you cannot get from here all the way down to here. There's no reason not, but it's a bit more complicated. What we like to look at is we like to align ourselves with the patient, therapist, patient, and then we can choose. We can talk, we can meet on the verbal level up here. We can work on the physical level up here, but we can also make our interventions happening on this level here. I don't have enough time to explain it, but when people go into what we call this deep in-stroke state, they're lying on the mat, nothing happens, they are deeply inside themselves. And the oddest thing, this is an example of something I couldn't understand from my other trainings. This person seems to be so deeply inside, and that's what they report later, but I feel them more present than when I was talking with them and began to touch them up here. So again, I had to come up with models and ways to understand this. So this involves what we call the self-to-self relationship. In psychotherapy, generally what is considered the developmental model and the therapeutic model, duplicating the developmental model, is the self to other. First the child to parent, and then of course, patient to therapist. And if we go back here, this arena between here, this relationship is where the change occurs in the classical therapy model. Our model understands if we can help people to go, whether we're working physically, psychically, if we can help people to go deeper down here, then they start getting more into what we would call the self-to-self relationship. And then if that alters, changes, then when they come back up somatically, psychically, emotionally, their relationship with the others change. So that's the model for right now. Hopefully it'll get a little more elaborated. We call this the return to the self. Too much, and especially in the Western world, is oriented to the outside. It's oriented to performance. And we know specifically character structures. You have, as a generalization, you have character structure problems who are the too oriented on the outside. For example, classical narcissist behavior, look at me, or people with self-esteem problems, or even oral structures who are constantly asking for more and more and more. Or you have the opposite, where you get really withdrawn people like the schizoid and shut down. They also are cut off from the outside world. So you have like a way, an overexpansion or too deeply in, but not all the way in and contracted. So the idea for all different character types is to return to this deeper sense of self, which I'll elaborate more later. And then they move back out into the world in a pulsatory manner, first in and then out. The classical psychotherapy is based mostly on the outward movement towards the other. So I want to run through quickly some brain-centered neurological research that would support this model of the importance of this return to the self. One is the Austrian, well, he did his research in America, Kandel, Nobel Prize winner in terms of working with memory. And what he points out is all sensory input is interpretation. We have no direct contact with outside reality. Our perception of the physical world is an illusion created by our brain. So, you all know this. I didn't do this one, Maria, sorry. You all know these classical Gestalt drawings. If you look at this top one, it looks like either a duck or a rabbit. Now, what interested the original Gestaltists 120 years ago, when they discovered this, here you have the vase, you can see two people looking at each other, or you see there's a vase for flowers here. What's very interesting about this is you get two different perceptions with the same data. Nothing changes out here. There's no new information that makes this a duck to a rabbit or the other way around. It's all how you see it. And this has a lot to do with the patient's history. We cannot as therapists go back and change the history, but we can help people to reorganize their interpretation of their history. So a quick example from a patient. We do concentrated programs. People come for 5 days. We do 2 sessions a day. In 5 days, 1 afternoon free. We do 9 sessions in a week. I was working with this man in a small group, and basically, he was I would call a schizoid process. He was a nice man, but he was quiet. He was alone. He wasn't very forthcoming or social, and he kept to himself. He had this undernourished quality to the body. I don't work with the past history a lot. If it comes up, I work on it, but I don't bring it into the therapy right in the beginning. So I did have the sense that there was some sort of early disturbance with him because of his body and his manner, but I didn't elaborate it with him. I basically did 9 sessions doing this points and positions, touch technique. It looks like shiatsu or acupressure, so you can imagine it. He's lying on his stomach on the mat. I'm working the rhomboid area, scapulas, and the spinalis, session after session. After each session, I ask, anything happening? He says, no, nothing to talk about. Okay, we do the same thing again and again. The very last session, the 9th session, I'm working on his back, and he starts crying, and he starts sobbing very deeply. We can cry from the throat, from the thorax, or what seems like the abdomen. The abdomen is the deepest one. It's the most releasing and satisfying. At the end, he says, yes, something happened. I realized my stepmother loved me. I always thought the things that she did to me was because she didn't love me. And so what we see here is, without talking about it, without acting it out, without expressing it emotionally, without doing any breathing movements, any of the classical techniques I learned in the verbal and the physical therapies, this young man completely reorganized a primary object, his stepmother. So the question is, how is this possible? This is what fascinated me 35 years ago. How can he possibly change all that around with nothing new? Well, it means all of that information, everything he needs is already there to reorganize it. All we have to do is to help the person to recontact himself and help them and then help them and support them to reorganize their image of their mother or their father or their past or of themselves. The second neurological research to support this idea of going back to the self and more deeply in is the work, very radical work of this man, Marcus Reichel. He's a neurologist. His research allowed the development of functional MRIs. Before that, we had MRIs and they were just taking pictures of the brain. Functional MRI can make a video of the brain as it's functioning. You can see what's happening. He was unique in that he studied the brain. He studied neurological activity in the brain while the person was the subject of the examination or the study was doing nothing. All of the neurologists had a task. The subject was supposed to do this, think about that, do this activity, etc. He did the opposite. Neurology is known forever that there is what they call background noise or white noise in the brain, but it was always considered unimportant. What Reichel discovered is there is a specific anatomically defined brain system, interactive, when individuals are not focused on the external environment. When they're daydreaming, a little spaced out in a hypnagogic state right before you fall asleep, you're present, you're not present, which is a state that people get into in the points and positions work on the mat. They sort of drift off. I'm not so important, but they know that I'm there. This default mode network, a terrible name to me. Default mode, your computer has a default mode. It's a backup. It's the basic underlying system. It is active when individuals are engaged in internally focused tasks, memory retrieval, envisioning the future, and most fascinating, conceiving the perspective of others. So when they seem to be drifting off and far away and gone, they're processing their relationships on a so-called unconscious level, for lack of a better word. There's also a well-known study by a man named Libet, L-I-B-E-T, where he could look at your brain with a functional MRI and know when you made a decision to move your finger before you were aware that you could do it. You would decide, I'm suggesting, but I don't know if this is correct, on somewhere on this default mode network, you make the decision so-called unconsciously, and then you become aware of it, and then you decide to move the finger. And the last of the neurological representations is the very interesting work from the combination of these two men, Soames and Panksepp. I have a bibliography at the end I could put up, but there is a very interesting article where Soames is a psychiatrist, doctor, and psychoanalyst. Panksepp, he passed away about a year ago. He is a specialist in mammalian consciousness. And they wrote a paper called "The Id Knows More Than the Ego Admits." And you can find it on the internet, and I would recommend it. What they're saying is that the self, the classical representation of the self, has been cortical. It's in the cortex. What they point out is, from the work of Damasio, Antonio Damasio, another neurologist, is that people who have brain damage, where that part of the brain, that cortical part of the brain is destroyed, people still have a sense of self. The self is still there. There are also children tragically born without this part of the brain, and they still have a sense of self. So it's clear the self isn't there. What they are saying is that representation of the self is the object, is an objectification. It's creating an object in the brain of the body and the self, exactly the same as you would if you created an image in your brain of a chair sitting in your room, or a table, or a carpet on the floor. This is one level. This is the object of the self. What they're saying is in the upper brainstem, what is classically known as the reptilian brain, there is a non-cortical, unified, body-based, subjective self. This is where the self is located. This is perfect language. If you're a body psychotherapist, this is perfect language for body psychotherapy. It's unified, it's not split, it's based in the body, subjective self. And they say, specifically, this is almost a quotation, the brainstem informs the higher levels of its needs. The classical model is the higher levels tells the lower what to do. They're saying exactly the opposite. And here's the, okay, this is with what I already told you about, with the stepmother. So this is a representation from neurology. It's brain-based, of how the sense of self is somehow deeper down than it was before. And it's not dependent on awareness. We are making, it was all the trauma research shows, the trauma is affecting us. Someone is traumatized, it's determining a lot of their life decisions all day long, and they're unaware because the trauma has been repressed and pushed away, and they can't bring it up into consciousness. Now, if you go what really surprises me, again, in my work, when I found this body psychotherapy, this radix work, I thought this is good. I'm going to work with the body and this energy the rest of my life. I developed some other things, okay, but I found home then. So I'm surprised now that so many of my articles, my latest articles, are about concepts of the self and how to work with that. So the idea is, if we go from the sense of self up here, cortical, down to the brainstem, and then in our model, we take it deeper, but let's stay here now. You start getting down here, you come with the idea of an endo-self. So I coined this phrase because I wanted to move away from specifically a psychic self. It's similar, I have an article written about it. It's similar to Maslow's being states that he reported on in the 50s and 60s. If you're familiar with Maslow's work, certainly this is an elaboration, especially in terms of including the body in the concept of a self. So if you go down deeper, you mobilize this in-stroke, which I'll explain more later. Person goes deeper in. They get to an early self-organizing, unified, embodied, coherent sense of self. And here's the key, why I call it endo, exists prior to contact with the other. You're born with a sense of, with subjectivity. That's the idea. And this fits in with the theoretical conceptualizations, representation of self as subject, self as knower. One of the early, in the 1940s, phenomenological psychology came up, Singh, who was a big influence on Carl Rogers. He's a good example of early phenomenological. Phenomenological still goes on. It's known, it's been incorporated into what they now call the positive psychotherapy movement. It has to do with my representation, includes the body, the mind, and the emotions in a body-based self. Recently, in a discussion with a bioenergetic therapist named Helfgerish, his position is that there's the objective, there is the subjective in the person, and they are not reducible to each other. They have to stay separate. In German, they have these nice words of Leib and Körper, and Körper is the objective and Leib is the subjective. But this continues, if you stay with the non-reducible aspect, we stay with psyche and soma. Yes, they can influence each other. Yes, they can be in relationship, but they're still different. They are not the same thing. And the whole idea of functioning and functional model that I took from Reich is, on this deeper level, they are in fact the same thing. And one characteristic, and here's the hard part for psychotherapists. Well, first I'll say, what's fascinating when people started going more deeply in, like I said, they just seemed to lose interest in me and the surrounding in the room. And later they would report they went to a state that was familiar and known, even though they hadn't experienced it. Maybe they experienced it as a child. Maybe they don't remember ever really having experienced it, but it was familiar. The French philosopher Merleau-Ponty talks about this also, phenomenological philosopher. And the common expression was a coming home. I feel like I'm home. And one woman reported there, I love myself beyond the good and the bad. So it's a very good state to be in, but it's also reality-based. I know I'm not perfect. I know I'm not wonderful. I'm not the best mother, the best therapist, the best wife, whatever, but I love myself. It's what Carl Rogers said, all the facts are friendly. And now here's the hard part. What we argue is this endoself state is undamaged. Despite all of the trauma, all of the, I want to use some bad words, I shouldn't say. All of the negative things that happen up here, okay? But down here at the deepest level, and this is the quality of functioning from Reich, no matter how many transformations, you could become ice, steam, or water, you could become a psychopath or a schizoid, or you could become Mother Teresa, or Barack Obama, whatever you want. But it's all different up here. And here, it's just nice. We're all individuals. I look at the gallery. Well, here's one, and here's another individual, and here's another. It's your particular organization of this, which is nice. But down here, we're all the same. So you can work with the individual, or you can work with the human quality, the human being. And then these things, as important as they are in our day-to-day life, this down here is more important. And you find this humanity again, and then you begin to bring it up, and things start changing up here on the interactive self to other world. So this leads us then, how do we get here? What is this going down? This is the in-stroke process. So Reich had the model of, there is this life energy, and it pulsates. It moves out, it moves back. He used the analogy of the amoeba. If you ever look at these single cell primary organisms in a microscope, you can see all that they are is plasma, basically. And you see it pulsating. And in fact, this is how they move. They move through life this way. They move out, they extend pseudopods, the rest of the plasma follows in, and then they become roundish again, and then they extend themselves out. It's like a rubber band. It stretches, you can pull it from right to left, and then you can let it come from left to right. This is pulsatory. It can go both ways. Again, with our classic diagram, you see it goes up, but it also comes back down again. So Reich talked about expansion, contraction. I don't want to go too far into it. I'm, again, concerned about the time. I just want to cover these points. I took from my teacher, Kelly, he talked about outstroke, moving out to the world, and in-stroke. And I found these terms better because expansion has a positive connotation and contraction has a negative connotation. Now, if pulsation is the natural healthy state, why would we contract? Reich says the organism expands in pleasure and contracts in anxiety. Well, why would half of my life be designed to be anxious? I wake up in the morning, I go out in the world, I make contact, that's expansion. In fact, in reality, that's not always so wonderful. It's not always pleasurable. And then in the evening, I come back and I go to sleep. Sleep shouldn't be anxiety filled. So the idea is to say, in-stroke, outstroke just simply describes the direction of the movement without any evaluation. And then we can add evaluation to it. If you're familiar with the classical Reichian model of emotional expression, you would see that most emotional expressions, even though it's a movement outward, somebody could be shouting in anger, but it's contracted. Someone also could be crying, trying to cry very deeply and release the deep sadness, but the problem is, of course, it's contracted. So either way of the pulsation, the outward movement or the inward, you can block it, you can interfere with it. The schizoid is a good example. They move in, they contract early, they've learned, oh, there's nothing out there for me, I won't bother going out, I'll stay in here. But they don't go all the way down. They just withdraw into a point where they feel safe in a way, but they're isolated, they're alone. They're not independent like they think they are, they're simply isolated. So the idea working, when I was doing the radix work, when I do the work in the functional analysis too, the idea is to help the person to restore their pulsation. With the radix work, I used to try and make them do it. I don't do that anymore. But pulsation translates directly into relationships. Relationships are not one way. As I said, self to other is more outstroke oriented. Self to self is more instroke oriented. Another example that's popular in psychotherapy now that uses what I would call the instroke process is mindfulness. There's a nice Shapiro and some other people, a nice article, and they have a good phrase where they say, you know, if I'm aware of myself, then there must be another part of me other than the aware self. There is a self that is aware that it is aware of itself. This to me is the endo-self state. This is this deeper part. And so if we look at this picture, this is a watery version of this. Here's the one going out. It's all very exciting. This is also in a lot of psychotherapy. This is even dangerous. Look right here. Here comes Papa. I got to get away from him. I got to stay away. If you get caught in these waves, I'm talking to Australia. Good. You know what the sea is like there. So I grew up in New York, where I was on the Atlantic Ocean. I lived in California, the Pacific Ocean. I know waves, and I know how to deal with them. I taught my children how to deal with them. But sometimes I live here now by the Mediterranean, and these people didn't grow up with waves. And occasionally we have a storm, and it's always enjoyable to go to the beach and watch these local people try and deal with these waves. And it's all elbows and asses. They get caught in the wave, they get thrown all around. And this is what this can represent. If you don't know how to do what he knows how to do or she knows how to do, you get caught in this turmoil. And this isn't going to go over well, but it's my opinion, too much of psychotherapy therapists are interested in this. They are fascinated by this and they get caught up in it. It gives them value and importance. And when you start working with the in-stroke work is not good for narcissists, because you sit down here with the patient and it seems like nothing is happening. And you're not the center of the whole activity. It depends on your particular approach. Some are more directed than others, of course. With radix, we used to tell the person, lie on the mat, start breathing. No, breathe this way, breathe that way, breathe faster, start hitting the mat, do this, do that. I learned, like I said, from three different Gestalt therapists. Two of them had the same style. The classic Fritz Perls, do this, do that. No, what about this? The other one comes from what they call the Polster method in Gestalt therapy. This was less directive. So the idea, outstroke is up here, in-stroke is down here. And again, if you know the ocean, it's not perfectly quiet here. It's more calm, but it's very powerful. The deepest currents are here, and these are the ones that continue. Up here, this comes and goes with the storms and the weather and the wind. This just keeps going. This is the deeper level. This is right here. It doesn't change. This just functions. It goes on. All this other stuff can go on, that's fine, but this doesn't change. Now, this can get interfered with. This is where the disturbances happen, and that creates all the disturbances up here. Imagine this as a bowl balancing on one point. If you shake this point, this will shake up here. This is what happens. People get in their development, they get shaken here. Things get out of balance here, and then the symptoms of that imbalance show up on this level. Down here, it stays the same. How am I doing so far? I know it's fast, but I want to throw out this information. Is it okay so far? It's all right? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
No.
Thank you.
Everyone seems to be still on mute, and yes.
All right.
Okay.
So here's the idea with the self to self, return to the self, endo self. All systems, any system, in this case, human beings, are self-referential in the first response to any situation. Now we all know approach avoidance. Yeah, this is basically the life reflex. Any system moves towards or moves away. We come back to the amoeba. If we have some amoebas floating in a solution, if we put a little electrical stimulation in there, we will see the amoeba physically contract and protect itself. We remove the electrical stimulation, the amoeba expands. It knows what to do to protect itself. Approach avoidance. What's the others? Other expressions don't come to mind. And this is self-referential. This is good for me. This is bad for me. And the argument is, and I'll perhaps support for this early amoeba plasmatic response is still alive in every one of us today. All later developments are built on earlier evolutionary developments. As Solms and Panksepp, the psychiatrist and consciousness specialist, point out, the brainstem can exist without the cortex. That's not a problem. The cortex cannot exist and function without the brainstem. And this goes all the way back to evolutionary history. So you have, for 2.5 billion years, we have animals living and still alive, same forms, with no nervous system whatsoever. They're dependent on this reflex. And when people get into extreme situations, they go into the so-called fetal position as a way to protect themselves. It's a plasmatic response. So you have the plasma, you have the connective tissue, just like you have the enteric nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, and the central nervous system. They're all built on top of one or the other. If the top one is failing, it falls back to the earlier one. If that fails, it goes all the way down to the last resort, in this case, plasmatic functioning. And what's interesting is these animals with no nervous system, they've been alive now for 8 billion years. They move, they find food, they devour food, they digest food, they reproduce without a nervous system. So the argument is, and I hope this time I can elaborate it more, it's based on connective tissue understanding. There is a non-nervous system still alive in us. It's a matrix, because connective tissue, they found out in 1969, all the connective tissue, in fact, most of the tissues, are semiconductors of all the body's energies. So light, heat, sound, etc., electricity, electromagnetism, all of these energies that keep us alive, and these energies are information to us, it travels through the connective tissue. And what's fascinating is not in one pathways like the nerves carry impulses, it goes three-dimensional spontaneously throughout the body. Just like the amoeba knows somehow something's happening and the whole body will contract. We see this with infants, and if you know the Moro reflex, when a baby's first born, they take the baby, hold it under the arms, and then they drop it a little bit. I've got some pictures of it. You can look it up on the internet, and you see the baby go like this. It's a whole body response. This is the plasmatic functioning. They don't have control over the nerves. The muscles aren't fully activated because the bones are not fully developed. All that they have is this startle response. This is what we see in the classic schizoid. The disturbance is so early, the only defense system they have is this response. Plasma connective tissue. Here's some, I like these. Here's some more comments from patients. When the in-stroke came, I had an appointment with myself. This one here, I didn't cry alone. A man, he came to see me. This is an interesting case. He was in his early 30s, middle 30s. He was married. He had 3 children. He has 3 children. He worked as a psychologist in some firm, and his whole body was built in a formless quality. His body, his trunk, his whole trunk was an oval. He looked a little bit like Potato Man, with legs and arms and a head stuck on. There was no delineation and definition in his body whatsoever. Connective tissue is what creates the form in your body, not the muscles. And from the work and the in-stroke work, he had a very difficult time. And he moved out of his house. Then he eventually divorced his wife. This was very difficult to move away from his kids. He also realized he was always somebody who did things for everyone else. So he's an example of outward oriented, no real sense of self. He was dependent on getting feedback and doing things for everyone else. So things were not, he was struggling in his emotional life. This was very clear. And he said to me, I saw him one session and he said, you know, I cried in the car while I was driving here almost the entire way here. But right at the end, I stopped crying because I realized I had someone who cared for me. And I said, you know, it sounds like classical psychotherapy transference. Dr. Wonderful is here. He will help me. But I learned to ask stupid questions in this work. So I said, who cares for you? He says, I care for me. And I didn't cry by myself. I have someone, I'm sorry, here it is here. This is another one very similar. The whole idea is I was with me, I wasn't alone. This one here also, I cried with myself. I didn't cry alone. A woman whose marriage was breaking up. She used to go off into the house privately so her child and the husband wouldn't know. She would cry and so on. This is a woman here who had panic attacks. Again, that kind of oval, formless body. Again, middle 30s, living with her parents and her grandparents. No work, no real relationship. On medication for panic and depression. She gets up off the mat and says, you know, I realized I always wanted to be somebody. Somewhere down there, my argument, my point is, somewhere down in there, there is the undamaged, undeveloped, almost completely undeveloped endo-self. She still knows she is somebody. And it's a nice play on words in English because she had nobody in her life and she had nobody physically. It was formless. And then there's the possibility I can still develop myself and be somebody. To use physics to support some of this idea. Physics is really interesting, hard for me to understand, but especially astrophysics gets interesting. Here are some people from the 80s, late 80s, early 90s you may be familiar with. These are physicists that changed physics in many ways. For example, until the research of these men, there is the phenomena, it's a real phenomena, chaos, complete disorder. And physics had no way to understand and study chaos. So they ignored it completely. It wasn't until they got, until Prigogine, Russian man working in the university in Belgium, developed mathematical models, and then they could start using supercomputers, and then they could start understanding chaos. So the problem with chaos for physicists is everything is in disorder, but then that system that is completely in disorder will spontaneously organize itself, which means inherent in chaos is order. Okay? And this they couldn't put together. This is totally contradictory. These men helped to do this. Eigen has a term called hypercycles, shows that even a system like a chemical reaction will do everything it can to engage the environment to continue reacting, to stay in existence. Same thing Jan says. Every system is self-referential, even inorganic systems, not even before life, and they will do everything possible to stay in existence. And this is a classic Reichian energetic concept, by the way. And then what's of interest to us, more specifically in psychotherapy, life itself violated all of the laws of physics. It violated the second law of thermodynamics, which says energy is always dissipating. In 9 months in the womb, that a child will grow and develop more in 9 months than it will for the rest of its life. How can it keep growing, a gathering process, if all energetic processes are dissipating? Okay, so until Prigogine came up with his dissipative structures, et cetera, physics considered life itself an anomaly, just something that happens sometimes. Now, this supports Reich's pulsatory model, if you want to talk in terms of energy, but you don't have to. There is a gathering process. And when we do the in-stroke, this is the gathering process. All of this confused, all of this fog and smoke, the essential qualities of who I am and what I am, not what I need, but what I want, we can condense it down here, get it clear, and go, oh, okay, let me try this, let me try that. So we work with the gathering. Verbal technique and our physical technique looks to what we call mobilize the insto. The verbal technique is based on Carl Rogers. If you've ever seen Rogers' work, he listens to the patient, he paraphrases what they say, and he feeds it back to them. And this brings all the focus onto the patient. And then the patient feels seen and appreciated. They then feel safe. They feel someone cares for them. And so they elaborate more and more. In a totally different way, but exactly the same functioning, Fritz Perls did the same thing. He kept bringing everything back to the person at the present moment. Who are you? What are you doing? What's that about? The classic videos you find on the internet, him working with Gloria. Gloria gets angry at Perls. She goes, you know this and that. And Perls just stops listening to what she's saying. He says, do this. Yeah, do this. What's this? So he's always bringing it back. And the same thing with focusing. So in the verbal technique, it's a synthesis mostly of those three approaches. We're still looking to bring, it's like if you're playing ping pong or tennis with someone, you always want to keep the ball on their side of the court. It's not over here, it's always back over there. Carl Rogers did a beautiful thing. He also worked with this woman, Gloria. These things were filmed. This woman is talking with Carl Rogers, who's like everybody's wonderful grandfather. And she suddenly says, oh, I would love to have you as a father. And Rogers, in this most beautiful way, says, well, I'm sure you would make a wonderful daughter, but that's not the point. And now back to you. He accepts what she says and then just gently turns all the focus back to her. The points and positions technique is the physical version of let's bring it back to you. The verbal work is indebted to Rogers and this approach of how to do this on the verbal cognitive level. Now, where are we? We're doing all right. I'm doing okay. I hope you're doing all right. I want to talk about the neurology that is not brain-centered, which we usually think of. I think psychotherapy has been hypnotized by the wonderful research in brain neurology, and it's supposed to answer all our problems, but we can't work on the brain. We can't touch the brain inside it. So body-centered, the interface of affectives and cognitive neuroscience. This man here is very important. He's a German man and publishes in English. At the end, there is two, I'll mention it now quickly. He has on the internet Plasticity Part 1 and Part 2. This is a lot of the material comes from him. He's a Rolfer by training. He's a biologist, a doctor in biology, I believe, etc. So there's been some, up until recently and up until men like him and a little earlier, except for osteopathy and Rolfing, structural integration, nobody paid any attention to connective tissue. It was considered packing material, like bubble wrap. And if you look in any anatomy book, still you open it, you see all the connective tissues taken away and thrown away. It's not important. When I first started studying connective tissue in earnest, there was no very little vasculation and no innervation. And now we find, this is why I want to present this, we find exactly the opposite. So, you know what? The connective tissue has many, many forms. The end of your nose, cartilage, ears, this is connective tissue. Blood plasma is connective tissue. Bone is connective tissue. Ligaments, tendons. And if you know the term fascia, which is usually sheets, very strong sheets of connective tissue fibers, tightly bound and mostly collagen with some elastin in them. They do stretch, they are flexible, but mostly they're there for support. Does anybody, never mind, it's too far away. So fascia is throughout the whole body. If you talk about the musculature system in the body, they also use the term myofascial system. Myo is muscle, fascial is fascia. It's a combination of the two. So every muscle in your body is surrounded by a thin, translucent skin layer of connective tissue. If you go out this afternoon, you buy a chicken leg, you pull the skin away, you'll see what's attaching the skin to the rest of the muscle, the rest of the leg. You'll see this tissue. This is connective tissue. And then that's connected to the envelope around the muscle of the leg itself. Woven throughout the fibers of the muscle are connective tissue fibers. Again, mostly collagen, but elastin and some little other ones. And then in the muscle, as the muscle gets thin and goes to attach to the bone, the creation of the tendon begins with that envelope, connective tissue fibers, the fibers inside the muscle tissue, they join together, plus additional fibers, and they attach, and then they come out and the tendon attaches onto the bone. That's all a continuous connective tissue phenomena. And the thing is, connective tissue connects to everything else. There is nothing in the body that is not connected to everything else through connective tissue, all the way down to the nucleus of every cell. Technically, if you touch the skin of a patient, you can directly put an impulse into the nucleus of every cell in the body, theoretically, structurally. So, fascia, which is the largest protein mass in the body, I'm pretty sure. Fascia sensory nerves and other receptors, which are these are the names of other types of nervous tissue receptors in the tissue. They all together might be have more sensory receptors than the retina of the eye, which was always considered the strongest, the biggest sensory human organism. Okay, so going from packing material to be the largest, most sensitive sensory system in the whole body. The fascial system has 6 times more sensory nerves than muscle tissue. For the sensoration, for the relationship to the body with the senses, the 3 main criteria, 3 main phenomena: proprioception, space, movement through space, pain, and visceral interoception. Fascia provides our most important perceptual organ. So it's gone from inert to being the most important perceptual organ. In fact, what's interesting in proprioception, which we usually think of muscles and movement and balance and how to balance gravity and work against gravity in order to move, it seems like with the discovery of the sensory system, the muscle prioritizes the sensory aspect over the proprioceptive. Sensation is more important than proprioception. I'll show you what I mean here. This would be a muscle fiber, nerve fiber. Okay, this part you can't see, so it has to do with the blood system, with the pumping of the blood and the tension in the veins. So this is a large section, almost half. The rest of this, of a muscle fiber, only this much of the whole muscle fiber, nerve fiber, is concerned with movement. The rest is sensation, and this is specifically the receptors in between the cells of the tissue. They're not even the cells themselves. Interstitial tissue, do you know it? Extracellular matrix. These are the common expressions. Every cell is suspended in a medium. This is plasmatic, what they now call ground substance. It has some fibers in it, etc. Even in there, within the middle, between cells, you have receptors. This between cell and same thing in the cell, you have the same. This is the matrix. The interstitial tissue is the matrix that I mentioned earlier. So, and then we find neurologically, not only is there interoception. First, they used to think it was basically visceral. Now they see, once they discovered all of this fascial sensory system, interoception is throughout the whole body. And neurologically, not only is there interoception, there is interpretive interoception. Now we're back to Kendall's, the original neurologist I talked about, talking about the brain itself. Everything is interpretive. What this one researcher calls the illusion that we create. I wouldn't use the word illusion because we experience it and it's very real. It is our life. But I understand it is an interpretation. It may be a correct interpretation or it may be an incorrect. This starts becoming important for body, anyone who touches the body. Depending on the state of this matrix, of this internal system, it can change. It can be healthy, it can be unhealthy. Stress, dehydration, toxins, pollutants, it degrades the matrix, since the energy, the information, luminescence, biomagnetism, heat, electricity, whatever, is passing through this system. If this, you can interfere with the transmission and the interpretation of this thing. So what does this translate to? If I go to touch a patient, I use this, as I say, this technique, physical, very generally it's light, should be non-invasive, that's the whole idea. I can touch a person. Some people don't feel my touch until 3-4 months later. They go, oh, now I feel you touching me. I never felt you when you were touching me before. Other person might feel that exact same touch invasive. Someone else might feel it sexual. It all depends on their interpretation of the interoception of the fascial tissue, and the fascial tissue's health, its state will determine what is interpreted. And what I like with the points and positions technique, let's say I do 3 sessions in the morning, I can do exactly the same points and positions on 3 different people, and I got 3 different results. This is, there's, and anistropy and thixotropy. These are terms for how the system will receive the information differently. So the flow, the information between the three known nervous systems, central, autonomic, and enteric, they're bidirectional. And the enteric and the CNA, they communicate through the vagus nerve and the pelvic nerves, sympathetic pathways. 90% of the fibers in the vagus go directly to the brain. In turn, the CNS has 10% of its fibers going down to the enteric nervous system. So you get this up and down, back and forth movement. You have the brain, you have the body. It used to be this is what dominated, and if it could, it told this what to do. But of course, we know it didn't really work that way. Otherwise, you could tell your patient, stop doing that, and they go, oh, okay. Stop feeling bad. Stop thinking that, it doesn't, but we know it doesn't work that way. And what's important is what Reich pointed out, I don't think he's the only one, nerves only carry impulses. Without impulses, nerves are useless. So where and how are the nerves getting this information? And the research now on connective tissue brings it to a much deeper, earlier, more primary level, more basic level. Connective tissue mechanical receptors. So these are some of them. This Golgi, this is spelled wrong, by the way. It's G-L-O-G-L-I. These are all, and then this is all Italian. These are receptors in the muscle, in the tendon, and they respond to the tonus, tension level in the muscle. If it's stretching, if it's contracted. And then there's a nice technique I adapted to the positioning point of my work, where the osteopath, instead of trying to stretch it or force it to happen, he would bring it in and compress it so that it could relax. It wouldn't be contracted. It's a very nice technique. So you have muscle tension, stretching and contracting. Within the fascia, you have these different receptors. They're involved with the parasympathetic system, the relaxation part of the autonomic nervous system. And at the same time, interstitial, this is between the cells, between the fibers, etc. There are also more receptors. They're called fine nerve endings. So we usually think of the nervous system as the nerves, myelinated fibers, insulated, just like an electrical wire is insulated, and the impulse travels along it. At the end of these nerves that go into the tissue, they just branch out randomly. And so what you get is sort of like a satellite dish in the tissue, and it picks up any information that's coming, that's in its range, and it feeds that into the system, and then it goes up to the brain. So a lot of these, especially, for example, if I remember correctly, these Ruffini organs, they're called, they respond to pressure. So we do in points and positions work, we do some abdominal work. So osteopath, of course, they do this too. We put the pressure on there, some light pressure. This activates the parasympathetic system. You get global relaxation. You get the parasympathetic reflex. The vagus nerve becomes involved. The heart rate gets better. Blood pressure gets better. Respiration calms emotions, and it relaxes the muscles. Outside of Venice, Mestre, we did a study. We got money from a university there. We did a study to explore the effectiveness of functional analysis. And the study showed quite conclusively, because we had subjective response and objective biofeedback, heart rate, respiration, blood pressure. And from the experimental group of patients we worked with, we could register very specific vagus nerve activation in this positive way. And then this information goes up, and it affects the cortical patterns. It synchronizes cortical activity. etc. And of course, I could put over on the other side some of this that happens that goes back down. Okay? So this is the theory, and what I'm arguing for here and what's basic for functional analysis is a bottom-up model, not a top-down model. And here's my argument for it. Here's where it starts. Now, this is a very nice representation, and they say that this is how it works, but I think in reality, this is probably how it really works, especially in adolescence. It's not so easily straightforward. Enteric, let me see. The enteric nervous system was only discovered in 30 years ago. What's his name? Not Gellhorn. I don't get it right now. The enteric nervous system is part of the whole from this, so it's the top third of the esophagus all the way down through the whole digestive system into the anus. There is a nervous system, and what's interesting is that it's in communication with the central nervous system and the autonomic nervous system, but it's completely independent from it. So they talk to each other, but they're completely independent. And what's also, they say it's a displaced part of the central nervous system. Now, the enteric and both of these develop from the same part in the embryo. They come from the same cells. But if we think historically, the digestive system existed before the cognitive system existed. So it's possible that my argument is the enteric is not a displaced part of the central nervous system. The central nervous system piggybacked onto the enteric nervous system. They share 30 identical neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, etc. And which besides being, these are also involved. So we have all three of the nervous systems, the central nervous, autonomic, and the enteric sharing these neurotransmitters. But 50% of the dopamine is in, and 90% of the serotonin is in the digestive system. The neurons of both systems use these neurotransmitters. And in fact, there's such a direct relationship between central and enteric that a central nervous system disorder can create a digestive tract disorder and the other way around. So we have this very primary directive relationship to the digestive system. In the fetus, the digestive system is the first system to start functioning in utero, and it is certainly developed phylogenetically way before any kind of central nervous system. So we have this plasmatic, what they now call, they changed the term plasma to ground substance. We have this whole body, three-dimensional, non-neural communication system, as in the amoeba, still functioning in us. In terms of evolution, connective tissue developed onto the enteric nervous, autonomic. This part is the reptilian brain in the brain stem, and then the central nervous system. So we have, like we see in the amoeba, we get a response. This is, I think probably this should go the other way. First there's a sensation, then you get a response, creates a feeling, emotion and movements, onto cognition. Life reflex, experience, subjective self, evaluation and action. All emotions are evaluations. Thinking is evaluation. But the question is, what are they evaluating? My argument is they're evaluating these deeper things. I am angry at, I feel sad about. It's always about something else. It's not it itself, except if in the classical pain pleasure, but not in the emotional pain. And then it comes up to awareness. And again, as Soames and Panksepp have pointed out again and again, all of this can go on without awareness and cognition. And again, a lot of neurology has shown us that what goes on here, if you want, the unconscious, the default mode network, whatever you want to call it, it's determining most of our actions, our beliefs, our emotions, and we are unaware of it. All right. Okay, so far? I go on? Yeah. We'll talk about the points and positions technique. I think the third seminar is specifically about that, and we could, I think we could organize a video showing what it looks like. But let's say for now, as I mentioned, if you know what shiatsu looks like, points of touch or acupressure, specific points and gentle touch moves around, it's like this. So I learned the original classic Reichian model of breaking through the muscular armor, respiration, tennis racket, hitting cushions, stress exercises, like so. It worked. It even worked on me. It was so good. But after a while, I could see there's limitation to it. And so I'll tell you, the whole in-stoke concept came from my own experience in my therapy in radix work. I was young enough, I was strong enough and athletic enough. I could do all of these exercises physically, but I had this, I had a certain character structure where I could perform these exercises, but it didn't affect me. I could shut it out. I like to describe myself now as a former part-time schizoid. So I could just hold back, and I always got this sense and this image. I'm like in a castle that's under siege, and I pull up the drawbridge, close myself in. I just wait for this to go away. And so I realized that this wasn't a good thing. Why fly all the way to Los Angeles to pay these people? I could do this at home, you see. But I also had a sense that there was something very good going on there. There was something in there that was good, even though I was using it in the wrong way. And that was the beginning of the in-stoke technique. So the physical exercises, as I said, I saw them work. They work some on me, but I also first experienced the limitation of those exercises and the realization it didn't fit well for most character structures, for certain character structures, such as the schizoid, such as the oral, the depressive, what classically had been called the low energy people in the Reichian model. They didn't have depressives. They didn't have a lot of energy. And I realized that what you were asking by asking them to do these exercises and movements and shout and hit with the tennis racket, and this, you were directly attacking their defense system. And certain types of defense systems, when they're attacked, in a way they like being attacked, like the psychopath. They can get very aggressive and respond to that directly. The hysteric also, in their own way, they can also respond. They will engage that attack. Whereas, especially with the schizoid, it was terribly dangerous because the only defense the schizoid had was this deep plasmatic contraction. And if you tried to take that away from them, they would disappear. It was totally dangerous. It was an existential issue to them. So the idea was how to work with the defense and not against it. And so first I made an adaptation of the classical Reichian radix work I learned with the breathing. And so I'm not going to take the time to develop it. We worked with a little bit of breath, but not to charge or excite the person. The idea was to say it simply, everybody has enough energy. Some people had it more locked away than others. The trick was, how can we get them to contact their energy in a safe way? So there was a transition period. I learned a thing from this osteopath I mentioned earlier called positional release work. I didn't learn it from him directly. But he had an interesting idea. If you go to any of the physical therapies, and this includes body psychotherapy, classical body psychotherapy, they work directly on the tissue, and they try to get the tissue to relax, whether it's massage, can be gentle, can be deep, forceful tissue, can be structural integration, Walfing, or they give you exercises to do. The idea is to make a contracted state, to force it to open, and mostly it's the action of the practitioner that makes it open. Okay? This is what I call the classical medical model. It's the doctor that gives you the medication or cuts you open and takes the piece out or tells you what to do and so on. All right, I know that a lot of times this is very beneficial. What this man Jones, the osteopath, came up with is, well, this muscle is contracted. He's just working physically. It's sensitive. And so why force it open? Why not, can we help it to close a little more? Go past contraction to relaxation. Now, as therapists, we would say, as body therapists, this muscle is contracted also for emotional, personal, historical reason. So it has an emotional sensitivity. If we start poking around in there, it can cause trouble. It's sensitive. Why don't we just say, yeah, this is good. Now, here's the physical representation of Carl Rogers. Oh, okay, let's do this. And then, so he would isolate. I found this out. I found this technique because my back went out. If I sat down, I couldn't get up. If I got up, I couldn't sit down. I couldn't move. Went to see this man. I lie on my stomach. He does a little this and that, some testing things. Then he takes my leg, my ankle, my knee, my leg is straight, moves it out, and then he gently compresses my whole leg so that the right side of my pelvic bone comes up towards the costal. And instantly, I felt relief. The tissue was sore for a day or 2 days later, but the contraction was released. And so this was the technique of this positional release. So I thought, oh, this is nice. I work with contracted muscles. Maybe I can adapt this. And this man Jones has a very nice expression. There's no surprise for the central nervous system. And this is Carl Rogers. Let's not surprise anybody. Let's just keep going at their pace. And the classical radix work, Reichian work, and the other techniques, they have a tendency to surprise. And so the positioning part, we would take a part of the body, for example, the shoulders, a lot of tension in the shoulders, person's lying on the mat. We take them down, we hold them down by the elbows, right down here, and we slowly raise this up for the person. And we duplicate and even exaggerate what they're doing. And we hold it for some seconds, and then we move it back down. The touch technique is more development of my own. Essentially, when I was talking before about these, now I have an explanation for it. I started working on where the muscles were attaching, not on the mass of the muscle where most physical therapy techniques work. I would work on the connection, on, say, the tendon of the muscle. I'd work some on ligaments. I'd work on fascial sheath attachments. These Glogli receptors we saw earlier, these here, these are in the muscle, this muscle tension. You put light pressure. Now, since they respond also to pressure, all of these do, you put light pressure on these, on the tendon, you're affecting these, and then you start getting this response. You get relaxation. So I finally got a good explanation as to how the points work can work. Sometimes we work on the mass of the tissue, there's some exceptions, but for now, mostly the attachment, not the origin of the muscle, but the attachment, and then this releasing, these different positionings that we can do. So it's gentle, non-invasive, non-directive. And again, it always fascinates me how Each person responds differently to it. They take the information. Certainly there's input. Certainly there's the action of the practitioner, me. There is some input, certainly, but it's not directed. I am not, here's the hard part when I train. I say, we're not trying to make this muscle change. And then they say, why are we doing this then? Okay, so the technique, especially Jones's positional technique, it is looking to relax a specific muscle or muscle grouping. But this is local work. But in fact, as is generally accepted now in all of the physical therapies, there is no local work. It always goes systemic. And the reason it goes systemic is because of the matrix system. So you don't know where that input is going to go into the body. It depends on how that person has themselves organized, the state of the connective tissue, and specifically this matrix ground substance plasmatic level. So you use the muscle or the ligament or the tendon as a door, as a way to contact. And then you see later, and they, in a way, tell you later what happened. So here, to me, is an important point. You work with the tissue blockages, not on them, and definitely not against them. As soon as any system, if this is a defense, if we're talking psychologically in the body, the defense system, well, psychic or physical, anytime a system feels attacked, it's going to increase its defense. And this is what a lot of the classical Reichian techniques did. And this is why you always had to be careful in the verbal work. Like Freud said, you don't attack at the city gates. If you go right there, you're going to get resistance, resistance, resistance. And then you have to either back away and try it again, or you have to try and break through the resistance, which is always dangerous. So we don't work on them, against them. And then this expression from Jones, no surprises for the central nervous system. So for me, I like to think of it in terms of a continuum. There's the medical model on one side and the homeopathic on the other end of this continuum. And so we have, I like to think that mostly functional analysis is towards the homeopathic model. Let's see what happens. Okay. At the end of one training some years ago, one person said, so well, the points and the positions aren't important. And in a way, he was 100% right. But so we use the points and positions as a medium, as a door, as a way to help the person, for them to contact themselves on a deeper level. Input, in-stroke, gathering, reorganization, output. In-stroke, gathering, self to self, things change, and then comes the output. Again, another example, this woman came in and wanted to work about the problem that her kids were having in school because the marriage was not going well, and so on. I talked a little, she told me this, okay, I did the physical work on the mat. She sits up at the end and she says, you know, I don't need a man, I need myself. So it's not about what's going on outside. First, I get myself in order. And then if I'm not good with this man in my marriage, that's okay, I'll find another one, or I can be by myself. The idea is to come back to the self. And this works through this plasticity of connective tissue. And let me come back to this word. The whole idea with plasticity, the whole idea of connective tissue, the reason to work on it is it will constantly change its state and its condition. Under stress, if a muscle is stressed, the connective tissue fibers that are already existent in the myofascial system of that muscle, they will physically, in number, start increasing spontaneously, automatically, producing more and more fibers, thickening up, the tendon will thicken up. And even if you're young enough and the stress is enough, the bone, which is also connective tissue, will develop a little bump on it. It'll create a space there that's bigger, more surface area for the additional fibers of the tendon to attach to. All right? And then, under the right conditions, all of that will disappear and go back to its previous state. This is what's incredible about the tissue. This is its plasticity. And this is what we work on. And one of the things that it responds to is pressure. It responds to heat, also in some electrical treatment. All exercises, all physical therapy treatments, and all body psychotherapy, movements, exercises, and so they work on putting pressure on the connective tissue. Now, unfortunately, if it's too much, it only makes the tissue more resistant, fibrously building up more. So the rhythm of the pressure has to be in the right way. It's the same as if you're pushing a swing, you're pushing a child on a swing. You want to put some pressure and some input, but if you don't time it right with the movement, it creates more problems than existed before. So we are working, this is the hope of any body-oriented therapy. Chiropractic, osteopathic, massage, all of them, and body psychotherapy. If you take a piece of ice, little piece of ice, and you put it on your kitchen table, and you put your finger on it, light, very light pressure, it just goes, it flattens out, it melts. This is what you feel when you're touching these points and the tissue is letting go. It can change sometimes immediately. So I think, as I mentioned, this work is especially effective with these themes in therapy. When I mentioned earlier, it was my own personal experience first in the Reiki and Radix therapy, that all of this activity, this so-called outstroke orientation, it didn't fit for me. There were other structures who, even more so, it doesn't fit. Depressed people cannot get up and do all of this hitting. Low esteem, low self-esteem, themes with low self-esteem and not a well-developed sense of self, they cannot get up in front, especially of a group or the therapist, the important therapist, and demonstrate all of this stuff. Yeah? So I developed the in-stroke work first to help them. Well, if they're pulling back, why don't we develop a technique to help them to pull back, but not just get stuck, but to pull back further all the way deeper back to themselves. And so this worked well. And then I started using this technique with so-called outstroke people. But I encountered exactly the same problem with the outstroke-oriented people when I tried the in-stroke technique. It didn't fit for them. I'm not someone who likes to go back. I'm someone who's active. So one woman, for example, said, a German, Berlin woman, kräftig, big, very efficient, very controlling. She knew everything. If she didn't know it, it wasn't important to know. When the in-stroke started affecting her, this was difficult. She said, she came in once and she said, I feel like I'm lost in the universe, because she wasn't as active as she was before. Her identity was activity. So the in-stroke, if you work with it with certain character structures, you have to deal with it in a more gentle and respectful way than if you're working with the schizoid. Every schizoid process I ever worked with, they like this work. They just love it. They go, one German engineer, I did the abdomen work on him, thin, totally head-oriented, intellectualized schizoid. I did the abdomen work deep on, you go deep into the belly. At the end of it, He rests, I come back in, he gets up, he doesn't say a word. He comes up and he hugs me. He says, I always wanted to be touched that way. So so with a lot of early disturbance and neglect, these people can, touch might be also, the touch is a big problem with neglect, sexual abuse, physical abuse, because they experience touch as painful, whether emotional or physical. But the touch is generally non-invasive, and there are ways to adapt. If someone has a problem with being touched, there are ways. There's a nice video on my website where you can see where this woman has anticipatory pain. She thinks it's going to hurt her. She's imagining it's hurting her, but we managed to get below that, and then the pain just disappears. There was no real physical pain. But the idea is it goes slow, and it's respectful, both verbally and in terms of touch. We're referring the person back to themselves. We have this argument, the position, that there is an undamaged self. And I'll give you a good example of it in a moment. But what's interesting is, let me see if we come back here. Someone is traumatized. It's always psychic and somatic. There is no, I don't think there's any separation. So let's say the trauma is here. And the idea for most of the body works, since therapy works, is to come down very gently and very carefully and help the person to safely re-experience, relive, and release this, right? So that then it comes up and then it can get clarified and finished. It's okay, I say it that way, I think it makes sense. So the trauma is here. So you have psyche and soma, the normal social interactive level, the self, the social self, if you will. We have defenses here because they have to protect this down here, what this man Cosolino calls the unbearable self, the terrible traumatic thing that happened. I cannot feel that. So there you have your classic psychic, psychosomatic, depends on your view, defenses, which stops this from coming up and being re-experienced. Now, again, as we know, these memories are stored in the part of the brain where there is no time. I don't think it's in the brain, it's in the body, but it registers in the brain. There is no sense of time. At any moment, this monster here can break out. That's why you have these defenses. Now, what's interesting with this model, instead of going, if this is therapist, this is patient, and let's say in my representation now, the trauma is here, you always have to pass through the dark forest to get to the sunlight. You have to go through it, right? And there is always, of course, the risk of it's too much, it's activated, and then the person shuts it down even stronger, or it breaks out and the person is re-traumatized. Am I making sense? It's clear enough? All right. In our argument with the endo self, and why we say it's undamaged, you can go back to here. So instead of having to go through all of this, the history, the defenses, the trauma, the terror, the pain, to get to someplace more safe, you can meet the person down here. And this is a good example of why I could go back to the stepmother patient. How is this possible? You see, how can he do this? And then this was the first time I saw this. So I thought, an anomaly. It's okay, happened once, who knows? But it kept happening. This is why I started functional analysis. And I presented in Berlin 2018, this working with trauma without the drama. I had a very good crowd, not a lot of people, very interested, but I haven't heard a word from anyone because it's hard for therapists in particular to appreciate that there is a lower state. There is this undamaged self. So the trauma in the therapy, sometimes the trauma comes up, it's touched. but you don't get the traumatization response. In this case, a woman who was a therapist, she had worked on her trauma in her 2 different therapies as part of her 2 different psychotherapy trainings. And I'm working with her in a demonstration. I'm not doing therapy with her. It's just a demonstration in the training group. She was about 12 years old. She was tied to a sawmill, a real big saw where they cut the trees, the trunks of the trees themselves. She was tied and she was going to be sexually abused. And the man said, if you scream or anything, I'll turn on the saw. Now, this qualifies as traumatic enough. She managed, thank God, to escape. She wasn't sexually abused. So, but what's interesting is I'm just showing some points and positions to demonstrate so that then they would practice with each other and they would learn the technique. She's lying there, I'm working. Okay, we finish. I say to the group, anything, I tell her rest. Group, anything to ask before you practice. Okay, and she sits up and anything to say. She says, it was interesting. I relived my trauma, what I just described. There was no sweating. There was no fear. There was no heartbeat. She said all of this. All the other times I worked on my trauma, all of this came up, but nothing changed. Now I'm finished with it. She was in the training group. We finished the training group. Nothing came up again. I was in contact or indirect contact with her directly, indirectly over the next 5-6 years. I saw her at a Congress. I knew people who were still in contact with her. Nothing seemed to come of it. So my idea is you can work, there is an endo-self and undamaged self. Here's a good example, and I'll finish with this. Here's a man who is a body psychotherapist, international trainer. So he has a lot of experience, and he is in the classical, one of the more classical schools of body psychotherapy. He heard me speaking at a Congress in Vienna. He was selling his school's material outside the big hall in Vienna where the main presentations were going. And since everyone was in there, he just was standing at the door and he happened to hear me speak and he came up, he heard me talk about the endo-self. And in fact, he's the one who came up with the expression undamaged self. So he talked with me later. He goes, "Is this undamaged self?" I said, "Yeah, I think so." He came here to France and I did a couple of sessions with him. And then a year later, I did another couple of sessions with him. So this is the second set. I think I did 4 sessions with him first time and 4 sessions the second time. So I forget exactly, I think it was after the second or third session, he comes in and he said he had a dream. He woke up with the dream that morning. He saw the reality of his parents, his home life, and I have to explain first. The dream was he was in a mental institution. He was not committed, he was just present there. And there was a lot of very strange behavior going on. And there was a man standing and shouting and dangerously aggressive. And among other people, there was a woman lying on the floor, rolling around slowly and moaning, wrapped up like a mummy. So he had this dream. He saw the reality of his parents. This was not a new dream to him. This is my parents, his home life. And in this case, he could acknowledge the brutality. Nothing was new in the interpretation of the dream. He had already worked on it in his therapy. But there was a new clarity. Before, it was like in a cloud. The reality of his family life, his history, his parents was too brutal to be seen. It's not dangerous now to see it. I can face the reality of it. I didn't know about this dream. I didn't know about the brutality. I didn't know about this history. I didn't know anything about this. And he had worked on this in his therapy already. Something was developed inside so I could face this truth, a biological process. I don't know what it is. And at this point, I remember him sitting there touching, just lightly tapping his belly. But it's a healing process, my own resource. And I'm very thankful to my parents for what they did give me. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I've been doing therapy for 45 years. I don't think it gets better than this. I couldn't ask for anything more. It came up, he was safe, he reorganized it. He knows he's finishing with it. He knows it came from him, and he could stop dealing with his parents as mommy and daddy, but as adults who are no longer perfect. He went from a child-parent relationship to adult-adult relationship. After the first series of 4 sessions, I saw him at a Congress and he told me, I decided, because I remember he was talking about this relationship with this woman. It goes back and forth. I don't know. And he was a complainer. And he said, well, we got married. So you think, well, maybe this is a good thing. Finally, he's come forward. He's made a move. He's not stuck in the same position. All right. Then he came, he did these sessions, and this happened. And then about 6 or 8 months later, I saw him again at the Congress. And he said, at the last Congress, when we met in Athens, I met this really wonderful woman. And so I divorced my wife, and now I live on a Greek island with her. So I would say I don't like the idea of marriage and then divorce so immediately, but I think that first marriage represented a lot of this part here, the negativity. I feel sorry for the woman who was left behind, but I interpret that for him, it's a continuation. He moved from northern Germany, where it's cold, wet, and dark all the time, except in the summer when it's wet, dark, and cold, to a Greek island. Huh? And he's doing international training. And I saw him at the next Congress. Oh God, I'm losing my congresses here. And he says, oh, Will, I work with your technique, but I improved it. I said, okay. But the whole point is, what is this biological process? I didn't talk about any of this. I worked on his body in this very gentle, non-invasive technique. What resources is he talking about? How could he now say these crazy people who were brutal to me my whole life, and now I'm 50 years old, I can say thank you to my parents. Where does this come from? So, okay. Do we have time for questions or comments?
Okay. We have a little bit. Do you want to just pull down the thing now, Will? And
Please.
we'll put, okay. Stop sharing, that's what I meant.
Stop share, there it is. I'm sorry. There you go.
That's all right. There we go. So I don't know if anyone, whatever view you have, if you want to do see everyone or see Will.
Whatever. Why don't someone? Let's talk. If someone wants to talk, that's what's important now.
If, I'll talk.
No. You wait. Give them a chance. I've been talking to you for years.
I know, but I just wanted to break the ice.
Oh no, I wanted to talk, but I couldn't unmute myself.
Good. Oh,
sorry, I've got a cold, so I hope you can understand me.
Okay, go ahead.
I just found that talk really fascinating and nourishing, and I feel really grateful, Will, to your expertise and all your years of dedication in developing this.
Thank you.
you know, it's quite confronting for me a little bit because I've just done the radix training.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
And you know, I'm a fairly new graduate, and still before that I'd done Hakomi, and then I wanted to work even more with the body, so I did the radix training. And I imagine my trainers here kind of refute.
I know them. I know Norel and Melissa.
Yeah, I think she'd refute some of what, you know, I think that within radix, they're emphasizing the in-stroke much more now.
Yes, it has changed. It has changed. See.
But I am fascinated with this whole points, whatever the saying is, the points and the way you work with the body. I'd love to learn more about that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I also had a question.
Mhm.
I'm not a psychotherapist. I'm quite naive to this information. I thought your talk was very enlightening. I just wanted to confirm something. In the model of the psyche, soma, and nucleus, was the nucleus referring to the endoself?
You know, it's good. It's a good question. I don't want to be so mechanical. And then I can't answer it directly. We could say yes. If we're using a psychotherapy model, I would say yes. But if we're talking about in a classical, really exploratory terminology of Reich's orgone energy and so, then it wouldn't be in there, no. Let's say the endoself would be the direct representation of the orgone energy. But basically, yes, Adam, yeah. You can do that.
Thank you.
Hi, Will. Thanks for your talk. It's great. I just wondered about with how you decide which point, you know, where to work with on the body, or how are you drawn to different areas, or do you have a system that you use, or what's your?
All right. So one, we have a system. I'll explain it. It won't sound very. Are you a psychotherapist, Jakob? Are you a psychotherapist?
Yeah, kind of. I've done a lot of training in psychotherapy. I'm more of a body worker. I mean.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have a whole system. So we have a booklet that comes with the training. It's a manual, and we have points and positions all over the body. Now, in the training, we're very dogmatic, and it sounds silly, and it sounds stupid even, whereby with the trainee, they get a patient and they only work with this technique. Maybe they know other therapies, that's fine. They can do that with someone else, but we want them to do this. And there's a whole structure, and they go through this particular structure. And it's designed throughout the whole body. We work from periphery to center, and we work basically top down. So we start literally at the head, and we work down the thorax, down the back, and then we go down to the legs. We come up the legs onto the pelvis, and then the last part, we work on the abdomen. So this is the general structure. This is what we teach, and it's our general model. Now, as you get more experienced with the work, and you then you can, experienced therapists work not so automatically structured. And so each patient would be a little different. And so you can adapt. You could decide, well, maybe I would spend some time working on the thorax. Maybe I'd go down to the legs. Now, there should be a reason for this. And in the supervisions, even while people are still in the training, they say, oh, I'd like to change the program the way I just explained it. And then we have to say, yeah, but why? And we have to make sure that the trainee, or in this case, or even an experienced therapist, wants to work on that part of the body to change it. This doesn't work in our model. So there has to be a good understanding. theoretically, if you understand functioning, you understand your patient, you see how the technique works, you know how it works on this patient, then you can start coming up with different reasons to work on different parts of the body. But the main theme is not necessarily to make something happen. The expression, which doesn't make a lot of sense if I say it now, is, oh, I work there because it's interesting. And then, of course, what makes it interesting? Well, it could be held high, a thorax held high. That means the person has something invested. They're living in there. They live there. They're interested in being there. So I'm not looking to change it. I'm just getting to know who's there and what's there. And if I touch there and focus there, what do? How do they respond to this? No? So it's a general answer, but it's the best I can do right now.
Thanks.
Okay.
Any
Oh.
more?
Okay, Maria, you can talk. I'm ready.
Sure. No, I just
Yeah.
think I am one of those people who just did not cope with outstroke work. It made me really angry. And then I questioned myself for quite a while about, oh, is it me avoiding the therapy? So I had this kind of like beating myself up about it. But in fact, when we started doing your work, then I understood, no, it's not me. That didn't work for me. And it happened quite a few times in my life when I'd done things starting from primal therapy to Lowen or whatever. It just, yeah. So I really understood from my own experience what this experience is when we started training in functional analysis.
It's important to experience it. You know, it's typical, but it is important to experience it. Once you start, you cannot describe an in-stroke process. You have to know it. Maybe you know it from meditation or other things, okay, but it's important to experience it. I have a very strong, I stay with Reich's energy model, Orgone. You don't have to, most of the people I train don't believe in it. I'm a Reichian dinosaur, you know. This stuff just keeps making sense to me. I keep finding validation of it rather than disproving of it as physics develops more and more. There's more validation, there's more, I can't say proof, but the main theme is the model works. And so I think you don't have to believe in this Orgone. I have an old friend who I'm in contact with, and he says to me every time he sees me, he says, Davis, are you still out bilking the natives with that energy bullshit? And I go, yeah, I am. And the reason I do it, it works. If the patient doesn't have to believe it. My wife, we live here in the countryside in the south of France. This is agriculture. And my wife works, she studied radix also. And then she trains in functional analysis, but most of the work she does here is mostly verbal work. And these are not in a pejorative sense, unsophisticated people. But when she starts doing diagrams of pulsation and some of what I showed you, she says it's always amazing how the so-called uneducated people, inexperienced people, they get it. They go, oh yeah, this makes sense to me. So you can use the model, you can use the energetic model, but there is no dynamic, there's no psychotherapy that doesn't use energy, doesn't talk in terms of energy, but none of them will acknowledge it. What I like about it with Reich is he at least tried to say it's this and it's this. Everyone else uses it, totally dependent on it. Daniel Stern, the baby researcher, psychoanalyst, psychiatrist, doctor, his last book before he died was Vitality. He wouldn't use the dangerous E word, but he's completely dependent on it. So if you're interested in the training, you don't have to believe all this energy bullshit. I'll bilk you for other reasons. I'll trick you somehow else, don't worry. Should we finish?
Will, could I just ask you, what's the general structure of the training usually in terms of how much time or how it's structured?
They can send you, we can send you a program, There's we do a series of weekend workshops. I think I'm not sure in Australia if we're talking about 12 or 15, where we teach all the techniques, the theories, concepts. And then there's a second part, which is supervision. And you don't have to do the supervision part. You don't have to do both phases. So the first part is practical and theoretical. Second part is, supervision. And usually there's discussion and deepening the ideas. Once you start working with the ideas and the techniques, questions come up. And so you get a chance to elaborate them further. But Maria and Hermano, we have a program organized, so certainly they can send that out to you and you can get a better sense of it. And ask them more if you like. We want to do it online because one of the distance and to the problem with the COVID. I would do most of the theoretical. Afternoon would be the practical in presence with Maria and or Mano, depending on how they organize themselves. The idea I and my wife would come over a couple of times during that period of time so that we can meet and work together. I've been traveling for 35 years. I'm the only one who benefited from these lockdowns. I've been home for a little more than a year. I've never been home for more than 3 months in 35 years. So I'm not happy to hop on a plane right now, and Australia is far away. So it'll work online, some practical, in person, some. My wife and I, one of us, two of us would come over. Okay. Well, I thank you very much.
Thank you, Will, and we'll see each other in 2 weeks' time, exactly in 2 weeks' time, at the same time from 7.
That's the touch. That's where we do the touch thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
No. Time is the lost language, touch. Yes.
Yeah. All right. Okay. And if you're back for the second one and you have questions from this one, we can start with that. We can deepen or explore what we already talked about. Yeah. So have a good evening and thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Will.
Will.
Or you can send questions maybe also. If questions come up, send them.
Send questions here. Send them to Maria and Hermano. Let's see what answers they come up with. I got to check with these guys now. Okay. Take care and I hope to see you again.
Yeah.
Ciao.
Thank you.
Thanks, Will.
Ciao.
Ciao. Oh, thank you, everyone. And see you in a fortnight, and you'll be getting access to the link probably in a couple of days, because I'm very busy tomorrow. Yep.
Thanks, Maria. Thanks for organizing it all.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Ciao. Bye, Hermano. Bye, Gillian. Bye, Maria. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.